Obviously, it is convenient to make a clear distinction between voluntarily directed imagination and mechanical imagination. Undoubtedly, directed imagination is conscious imagination. For the wise, to imagine is to see. Conscious imagination is the translucent medium in which the firmament, the mysteries of life and death, and the being are reflected. Mechanical imagination is different. It is formed by the residues of memory. It is fantasy. It is necessary to investigate it profoundly. People, with their fantasy, with their mechanical imagination, do not see themselves as they really are, but in accordance with their own fantastic notions. There are several forms of fantasy, one of which consists of not seeing oneself as one truly is. Few are those who have the courage to see themselves in their crude reality. I am absolutely certain that those present here have never seen themselves as they are. Mechanical imagination deceives you by making you confuse one thing with another. You see yourselves with traits that do not coincide with reality. If I were truly to tell each of you what your different psychological characteristics are, I am quite sure that you would feel hurt. It is clear that you have a mistaken concept about yourselves, that you have never seen yourselves, and that your form of fantasy prevents you from seeing yourselves as you really are. Speaking in an allegoric and pleasant way, I will try to make a psychological exploration in a gross manner, without citing names or last names, using symbolic names so each one can understand. What could we say, for example, about Cicero? What a great man! Who would deny it? Eloquent, quite impressive. Are we sure that he is totally benevolent? Let us reflect about it. If we were to mention the gravity of his fantasy, he would feel hurt. If we pointed it out to him, he would protest violently. He never murdered Poppaea. That was Nero's work. However, because of him, Poppaea had a broken heart. He would not in any way feel truly alluded to. He has always felt himself to be a good-natured person. Well, that is his fantastic characteristic, to see himself through the prism of an extraordinary benevolence. That is obvious. And what would we say, for example, of him who, yearning for the light of the spirit, fails in its foundation? Is it not said that Icarus flew into the sky with wax wings, that they melted, and so he fell into the abyss? However, he does not think about himself in this way. He believes that he has loyalty to the cause. He is sure that he walks on the correct path, that he is a man like no other. So, keeping this in mind, what would remain of Icarus after falling into the Avernus? Is it not said that Ganymede ascended to Olympus? However, Ganymede can also be thrown to the bottom of the precipice. The disciple, we will call him Justinian as a symbol. How many times has he justified himself? He is convinced that all is going very well. Perhaps recently he has improved somewhat, but does he not protest at determined moments? Did he not protest at the altar of the sacrifice? But the unvanquished feels secure. He believes he has never protested, that he has always worked in favor of the great cause, without failure. In the name of the truth, although it may seem a bit hard to believe, rare are those who have seen themselves as they really are. Aristotle, all the time with his philosophy, is convinced that he has a formidable wisdom. He has not said this, but he has felt it. His wife, he is magnificent like no other. He has made her suffer, but he lives convinced that he has never done anything incorrect. He is sure of being magnificent, benevolent, sweet, etc. In the name of the truth, I could tell you that there is only one person that has seen himself as he really is, just one among all of you. All the others have a fantastic image of themselves. Their mechanical imagination makes them see themselves, not as they are, but as they apparently are. Therefore, my dear brothers, I invite you to reflection. Think if you have ever seen yourselves as you really are. Historians, for example, what have they written? Just fantasies. What do they say about Nero? That he was a homosexual and that he even married another man. What is the origin of that information? Are they sure about that? In the name of truth, I must say that I was reincarnated in the era of Nero, and he was no homosexual. I saw him many times passing through the gates of ancient Rome, sitting on his litter on the shoulders of his slaves. He was a man with a broad forehead and a robust Herculean body. Historians do not say so. They emphasize the idea of an abominable poet. Instead of being surrounded by homosexuals, I always saw him with his women. I lived in Nero's era, and I give testimony of that. Historians have falsified the truth about that man. Do they not accuse Marie Antoinette of being a prostitute, an adulteress, etc.? Nobody ignores that the issue about her necklace was made into a huge scandal, a jewel that she had given with the intention of helping. But to say that she was unfaithful to Louis XVI is far from the truth. We submitted her to a test in the superior worlds, and she was found quite chaste, with the right to wear the white tunic. I saw her passing heroically through Paris. She did not owe anything. She had nothing to fear. She gave her life for France. Her real value has never been appreciated. Many things have been written in history. It is deformed. It is not worth studying. The only thing worth are the dates. And not always, because how absurd would it be to accept the year 1325 as the year of foundation of the Anahuac Empire, only to have it later disappear in approximately the year 1500 under the boots of Hernan Cortes and his henchmen. Do you believe that in 2 centuries it would be possible to build a powerful civilization if to build a single pyramid required entire generations? Do you believe that a powerful civilization like that was built in 2 centuries? In that way, historians adulterate and falsify the dates. That is why in matters of history, we have to work with great care. You have to differentiate mechanical memory from the memory of the Gnostic work. Mechanical memory leads you to erroneous conclusions. Are you sure you remember your life as it really was? I am not asking you about your past existences, but about your present one. Impossible. There are things that appear distorted in mechanical memory. If we were born in a middle-class house and lived in a clean, tidy house, provided with food, clothing, and shelter, and we had seen some money, it could have been that with the passing of time and years, we retain a distorted memory. As children, a few dollars seem like millions to us. Some small pine trees in the garden or close to our window can seem colossal to us. And because our body was small, it would not be strange if, once we become adults, we say, as a child, I used to live in such a place. My house was magnificently adorned. It had great walls, decorated ceilings. What a beautiful table. How much money. An infantile, mechanical, and absurd remembrance. Therefore, the only real memory is the work memory. If by means of retrospective exercise we were to remember part of it, we would see that this middle-class house was not the palace we once thought it was, but a simple home of a sincere and laborious father. Those fabulous amounts of money were small amounts to pay the rent and buy food. Mechanical memory is more or less false. Let us take the case of the famous psychological test. If a group of you goes for a trip to Yucatan and sees the same monuments and stones, upon returning, each of you will tell a different version. What does this prove? That mechanical memory is unreliable. You have verified this many times. You have told something to a friend of yours who in turn has told it to another. But he added more things and took away something else. It is no longer the same story. He has distorted it. Later, the other person in turn tells it to another, and the story is more and more distorted. In the long run, not even you can recognize it. It has become so distorted that there is no relation between what you had said and the final version. Thus is mechanical memory. It is useless, because in mechanical memory, fantasy exists. Mechanical memory and fantasy are very much associated. So how can we then control fantasy? There is but one way to control it, by means of a work memory. Mechanical memory makes us see our life as it is not, as it was not. Through the work, we carve out our own life and come to discover it just as it really is. Then, what does this mean? That with the memory we store after having worked, it is possible to control fantasy, to eliminate it, and eliminate it radically. It is convenient thus to eliminate that mechanical imagination, because it does not permit us in any way to achieve esoteric progress. Let us observe the lady who gets ready in front of the mirror, who applies heavy eyeshadow, lines her eyebrows, adds eyelashes, and stains her lips with a red color. Look at her dressed in the latest style, how she looks at herself before the mirror, convinced she is very beautiful. If we were to say to her that she is frightfully ugly, we would mortally hurt her vanity. She has a terrible fantasy. Her form of fantasy makes her see herself as she is not. It makes her see herself as an extraordinarily beautiful woman. Then each one of us has a mistaken concept of himself, totally mistaken, and that is terrible. One can feel like a genius capable of dominating the world, that one has a sparkling intellectuality, and be convinced of one's capacities. However, if one could see oneself as one really is, one would comprehend that what one has in one's personality is not one's own, that one's ideas are not one's own because one read them in such and such a book, and that one is full of terrible moral lacks. But few are those who have the courage to strip themselves nude, to see themselves as they really are. Each one projects a form of his fantasy onto himself, and it is in this way that one has never ever seen oneself, and that is terrible, horrible. Well, thinking out loud, to share with you, we will say that as long as one does not dissolve one's forms of fantasy, one will remain very far from the being. Just as we disintegrate all forms of fantasy, the being will appear more and more in oneself. When one searches deeper into what life is, into what the world is, one discovers that one frankly has not seen the world as it truly is. One has seen it through one's forms of fantasy. Nothing more than that. Mechanical imagination, how serious it is. Dreams of fantasy. Sometimes the fantasizing dreamer remains silent. Other times he talks about them. And some other times he wants to bring them to reality. Obviously, the third case is serious because when a dreamer wants to bring them to practical life, he does terrible, crazy things. Since his dreams do not match with real life, he ends up acting senselessly. The quiet dreamer wastes much vital energy, but he is not dangerous. He who speaks about his dreams, fantastic dreams, is capable of infecting the psyche of others. The third one, the one who wants to bring his dreams to reality, is totally out of his mind. He is crazy, that is obvious. Well, continuing with this lecture, we can see clearly that mechanical imagination or fantasy keeps us very far away from reality, from the being, and that is truly lamentable. People wander the streets dreaming. They go in their fantasies. They work dreaming. They marry themselves dreaming. They live life dreaming in the world of the unreal. They never see themselves as they are. They always see a form of their own fantasy. To take away that form of fantasy from somebody is terribly difficult. Naturally, there are various forms of fantasy. Thus, each one of us has his own fantasy ego, fantasy I. A fantasy person who does not coincide with reality. Your fantasy person has existed from the beginning and will exist tomorrow. Now you are convinced that this fantasy person is real, but the truth is that it is not. That is very serious. I repeat, how can we control fantasy? There is but one way to control it. The work memory, to be sincere with ourselves, to work to eliminate the undesirable elements that we have within. As we eliminate them, we will discover that there is an order in the work. Who is the one who comes to establish that order in the esoteric work? The being is the one. He permits us to eliminate fantasy from ourselves. But it is necessary to have great courage for one to be able to break the fantasy ego, the fantasy person for a moment. There are very rare instances in life in which one achieves seeing one's own ridiculousness. Moments in which one achieves perceiving one's fantasy ego, one's fantasy person. When this happens, there exists a very deep moral pain, but afterwards the dream comes once more, and one searches for a way to straighten everything up, and at last one consoles oneself in 50,000 ways, forgets the incident, and the world remains in peace as always. You are here listening while I am speaking. I am sure that our brother Arce is convinced that he is him. So he says, I am Arce. For example, I am a businessman. My nature is of such and such a form. Who could say to Arce that he is not Arce? Who could say to him that he is not a businessman? Who would dare to say it to him? And perhaps could he believe it? Could he perhaps accept that he is not Arce, that he is not a businessman, that he is not what he believes he is? I am sure that even he would not believe it. What would you say?
Venerable, in front of you there are no doubts.
But what if someone here challenges that fantasy ego of yourself, saying that you are not who you say that you are? Perhaps you would say to me, whatever you say, Master, I agree. But who knows if face to face with that person you might think differently. Well, that is your concept. I am Arce and I am as I am. That is obvious because you have always known yourself. Is that not true? The one that you believe you are does not exist. It is a fantasy. It is hard to accept what I am saying to you. It is frightfully difficult. But later on, when you explore yourself psychologically, you will find out that you had a wrong concept about yourself. This is what happens with those that are here. They have never seen themselves. They have always seen a form of fantasy about themselves. Each one here has a fantasy ego, a fantasy person which is not real. It is worth it to be sincere with ourselves. The idea is to self-know ourselves. If we really want the being to manifest within us, if it is that we truly yearn reality and nothing else but reality, without an atom of fantasy, we need to be sincere and to have the courage to dismember ourselves, to destroy that fantasy person that does not exist. People do not know it exists, but one knows it does. Of course, one needs to use the scalpel of self-criticism. If not, to do a profound self-criticism would be impossible. If we proceed in this way, we will achieve destroying the fantasy ego. We will achieve breaking it into pieces, reducing it to ashes, to cosmic dust. Objective: discover the being which dwells in our depths. The fantasy ego eclipses the being. It maintains one so fascinated with what is not real that one is unable to discover one's own being, the being who exists in the depths of oneself. Do not forget, my dear brothers, that the kingdom of the heavens is within us, and it has different levels. Also, the highest level in the kingdom of the earth does not reach the feet of the smallest who live in the heavens. But how to exit the distinct levels of the earth? To at least enter the lowest level of the kingdom of the heavens, by walking from the kingdom of the earth to the first stage of the kingdom of the heavens within us. The kingdom of the earth has distinct levels, some higher, others more refined. But the most refined level in earth is not the kingdom of the heavens. To move from the highest step of the kingdom of the earth to the lowest step of the kingdom of the heavens, one needs a radical change, a transformation. One needs to reborn from water and spirit. One needs to unfold in two, the earthly personality and the psychological man, the inner man. How can this unfolding in two be produced? A worldly inner man is placed on a common level of humanity, while the other has to be placed in an upper octave within oneself. Indeed, how can the separation of those two types of men be truly produced in us? Do you believe this would be possible if we continue with this fanciful personality we believe is real, which is not? As long as one is convinced that the form one is seeing is the true one, the separation of the internal man from the outer one will not be possible. It will not be possible thus to penetrate the first step of the kingdom of the heavens. Obviously, fantasy is the one which has the world submerged in its state of unconsciousness. As long as fantasy exists, consciousness will continue to sleep. We must destroy fantasy. Instead of fantasy, we must have the conscious, directed imagination within ourselves. Fantasy is mechanical imagination. Instead of fantasy, we must have the work memory. So, he who practices the retrospective exercise to review his life finishes off with mechanical memory in himself and establishes the conscious memory, work memory. So with the retrospective exercise, we can remember our past lives and we can end fantasy. The work memory and conscious imagination will permit us to go very far in the path of self-discovery. Until here with my words. If any of you has any question to ask, you can do so with the most absolute liberty.
Master, which could be the best exercises to develop conscious imagination?
As conscious imagination is directed imagination, thus, indubitably, we must learn to direct imagination. For example, We relax our body and later focus our attention upon the process of the birth and death of all things. Through this exercise, conscious imagination will be developed. Let us imagine a rose seed, for example, how it germinates, how the stem grows, how its branches, stems, leaves, and flowers sprout from it. Later, let us think of the opposite process, the involutive process, how the petals droop, how the leaves fall, and at last, the rose bush is turned into a bunch of dry branches. It is a wonderful exercise with which we can achieve the development of imagination in a positive way. How can we eliminate fantasy in ourselves? Simply by dissolving, first of all, the fantasy ego. We must start by seeing ourselves as we are, not as we apparently are or as we believe we are. It is difficult to see oneself as one is. One normally sees oneself as one is not, as one believes oneself to be, according to one's own fantasy. That is where one must begin to break from one's fantasy. When one has seen oneself as one truly is, in the most crude realism, one suffers a terrible disappointment, a horrible disappointment. If one finishes with mechanical memory and establishes the work memory, one eliminates fantasy, because in mechanical memory there is fantasy. I already told you of the case of the history of our historians. It is pure fantasy. Were the historians present by chance in the French Revolution? Did they meet Charles V of Spain, Philip the Handsome? No. They write based on versions disfigured by time, products of fantasy. If we, instead of mechanical memory, which is pure fantasy, establish the work memory, if we work over ourselves, dissolving the undesirable elements we carry within, we would obviously continue acquiring conscious memory, work memory. This conscious memory or work memory is marvelous. Applying it to universal history will permit us to study the different things, the crude reality of the French Revolution, of Marie Antoinette, or of any page in general history. Conscious memory, thus applied over ourselves, takes us very far. Applied on the universe, it permits us to know through the Akashic archives of nature. Thus, in so much one is eliminating all one's fantasy, conscious imagination will make itself more and more active. Inferential peace.